Hey there, I'm Pete Townsend, and this is Money Never Sleeps. We look inside the minds of entrepreneurs and at the crossover of startups, enterprise, finance, technology, and life as we know it. Before we dive into this week's episode of Money Never Sleeps, just a quick heads up that the ETH Dublin Hackathon 2023 is just ahead of us in Dublin on May 26th to 28th at Dogpatch Labs in Dublin. ETH Dublin is the first Web3-focused hackathon conducted in Ireland, and the idea is to create a space for the community to build and attract talent to the Web3 ecosystem. Check out the details on ethdublin.io. On the show this week, we've got Lee Gray, co-founder and CEO of SonX, one of the 12 founding teams forming the Techstars Web3 Accelerator class of 2023. SonX is a community platform that allows superfans to subscribe to their favorite musicians via a monthly membership fee, unlocking fan-only ticketing, exclusive audio content, and digital and physical collectibles. Lee Gray has 12 years of professional experience across creative industries, including music, entertainment, and fashion. Prior to SonX, Lee served as a head of talent and creative strategy at Sony Music Entertainment UK. He has also worked as a broadcast and entertainment talent agent at Intertalent Rights Group, where he represented and helped to launch the careers of notable figures such as Clara Amfo, Patricia Bright, Montana Brown, and Nicola Adams. Lee's career in fashion began with essential work experience at some of the industry's leading publications, including Cosmopolitan, In Style, Harper's Bazaar, and British Vogue. In this episode, Lee and I dig into why it made so much sense for him to launch SonX alongside his co-founder Lewis Donovan, some of the ins and outs of the music industry that point to the need for SonX, Lee's longer-term vision for SonX, and the core challenge of uniting musicians and their superfans. All right here on Money Never Sleeps. Lee Gray, how you doing today?
I'm good, Pete. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome.
Money never sleeps.
Yeah, no, great to have this chat with you, especially given where SonX is coming from. So thrilled to be digging into this with you. Also thrilled to be an investor in SonX through Techstars. But before we dig into SonX and what it is, your background just speaks volumes about your readiness to pull this off. So maybe just tell me about what got you excited about Web3 in the first place, and really about what got you excited about uniting artists and their super fans together, and then your route to getting together with Lewis Donovan to get SonX up and running.
Yeah, I actually think my excitement around Web3 probably started with the beginnings of my relationships with Lewis. So, I had the idea for SonX while I was still at Sony Music. And I think for me, being someone that was outside of the music industry, so I never wanted to work in music. I'm quite upfront with saying that. I started in fashion and then entertainment, but music wasn't something that I was ever interested in. And when I started working at Sony, I thought it was just really interesting to see the relationship that artists had with their fans, which over time had deteriorated because of the digital world and the fact that you no longer had to queue up at HMV anymore, and you could just go on to Spotify or Apple Music, and you feel like you're close with an artist because you're following on Instagram, although they don't know who you are, kind of thing. And so that's sort of where the origins of the idea sort of came up from, because I just sort of felt like these two entities were supposed to be and are still supposed to be the most important. And unfortunately, they, in my opinion, have been devalued in some sense. And so when I decided that I was going to create the product, my first hurdle was the fact that I clearly don't have a technological background. I can't code. And so I started to reach out to different developers. I clearly had done my research, and organizations like Techstars were telling me that I need to have a co-founder. So I started to kind of go down that rabbit hole. Unfortunately, a lot of them that I met just didn't mesh in personality. They wanted to do calls at 2 a.m., even though we were in the same time zone. And after they had finished playing Call of Duty with no cameras on, that kind of wasn't my thing. Yeah. And so Lewis and I were both working at Sony Music in the same division, but not necessarily on the same team. And he had sort of handed in his notice and was interested in obviously leaving the company. I think that he potentially was looking at being freelance at that time. So when I looked at his LinkedIn, I was like, oh my gosh, you were at Sony Music for 5 years. And actually, would you not be the most perfect co-founder? Because number one, you understand how this industry works. You really care about the fan experience, and you are a music lover yourself. And it was actually Lewis who, when I brought the idea to him, we always say that we're sort of yin and yang in the sense that he focuses a lot on the fan experience and I focus a lot on the artist experience, which sort of kind of makes sense given where we've come from. And he was the one who sort of was like, yeah, I really understand what you're trying to do for artists here, but I don't feel like there's enough here for fans. Like we already have, platforms that allow for a monetizing of your audience, for example, like Patreon, but, you're not giving any ownership to the fans. You're not letting them be seen as an individual. And that's how I sort of got introduced to Web3. That's what made it really exciting for me, because it meant that we had technology which would serve a certain problem that I was aware of, but didn't necessarily come up with a solution for. And that's sort of what Lewis brought to the table.
I got you. And we're going to get into this in a minute in terms of what SonX is and unlocking the relationship, uniting superfans with the artists they love, right? But really interesting thing I just learned about you is that you don't consider yourself to be a superfan of anybody.
No.
That's actually a really good position to be in, right? Because like you said, obviously Lewis has the side covered from the fans. You've got the side covered from the artists. And I'm thinking of, and this is a totally random analogy, okay? So bear with me for a second. The Boston Red Sox finally won the World Series in 2004 after 86 years. Theo Epstein was the general manager of the Boston Red Sox at that time. When he was hired the year before, he was like 28 or 29 years old, one of the youngest general managers ever in Major League Baseball. And that he had to step away himself from being a fan of the Red Sox, right? Because he grew up in Boston. He was a fan. He successfully stepped away from being a fan, and he was able to just execute and deliver the team that needed to finally break the curse of the Bambino after 86 years. Now, I won't get into the curse of the Bambino, but I'm thinking that having that clarity of mind to really step away from the fan side of it and focus on the artists, right? That is going to be critical here, isn't it, Lee?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, for us, having somebody that is there and thinking about why artists will want to use this, and because at the end of the day, artists are our customer, as much as we are serving fans, artists are a customer. Without the artists, we don't have a platform. And so it's incredibly important to not just understand why artists will use this or how they would use this, but understanding the behaviors and how most artists behave. You know what I'm saying? I think that unfortunately, in my opinion, some of the other platforms that may be seen as competitors to us, I don't think that they've nailed so much on figuring out how artists will actually use this on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of assumptions of how artists will want to use it, and that's because they've never worked with talent. And the great thing is that, not only have I worked at talent at the high level, I've worked at talent and the mid-level and the low level, those that are starting out. And so I've been able to figure out the needs of each tier. And similarly, for Lewis, he's built platforms for all of those artists with fans that have, just found out about an artist and are pretty new in their fan journey, to those that are catalog fans and have been fans for 25, 30 years and want a very different kind of experience. When I was 21 years old, as I sort of said, I started in fashion, and I worked in fashion because I loved it, kind of thing. I wanted to be a fashion editor, and then I thought that actually I wanted to have my own brand, and so I created that. I did the Virgin Startups program, and they gave me, I think it's £20,000 to start your brand, and I figured out who my manufacturers were in China and found some buyers and set up my website. It was a self-titled brand. So unfortunately, Lee Denim came after me and sent me a cease and desist, and I didn't have money to fight back. So that went away, and I was able to find someone to buy the stock. But what I realized in comparison with this experience to my fashion brand is it took me so long to get that fashion brand out the door, because I was sort of like, what does the hem look like? What does the color look like? Like, is that the right fabric, etc.? And I think having that sort of step away from it and not being a super fan of it, of what I'm trying to create, if that makes sense, has helped me to have a to make better decisions with it. I believe anyway.
Yeah, no, clarity of mind, and absolutely that works. And, you know, you and I have talked about this before, is that, you know, you will not be putting U2 on the platform because it's just not the right demographic. And I'm almost happier that you're not, because as a super fan of U2, I just be conflicted. So
Yeah.
as an advisor, so let's just skip that. So we touch on this a little bit in terms of what SonX is, but let's really dig in. So Lee, tell me, what is SonX and why is it something that the world needs right now?
Yeah, so SonX is a community platform that allows superfans to engage with their favorite musicians for a monthly membership, where they unlock exclusive voice and audio content, limited edition physical and digital collectibles, and fan-only ticketing. For those that know about the music industry, they're going to be like, yeah, I understand this. I've heard about this problem for a long time. But for those of you who don't, you know, of the 11 million artists that are currently on streaming services, about 1,000 of them make over $1 million, and about 10,000 of them make over $50,000. We're interested in the middle class, those that have built a following but are struggling to monetize their audiences, and so therefore cannot continue to make music or have a sustainable career. On the fan side, you know, I think that it's more of an emotional thing. As I sort of previously mentioned, it's about wanting to be seen as an individual, wanting to connect with other fans. There's this sense of loneliness that has come out of superfans going to concerts on their own. So we want to build a platform that allows you to buy a ticket and then suddenly you're in a chat together and you're able to go to a concert together. So yeah.
Okay. All right. I got it. I have been that super fan that's been to a gig before by myself. So Blink 182 again, dating
Wow.
myself here. So that was in Dublin a few years ago. I had 2 tickets. I couldn't get anyone else to go. But if you think about kind of the bigger vision with all of this, Lee, and if you think about how the world looks like where SonX is an absolute necessity, what does that world look like for you?
I think that SonX will usher in a new era of music fandom. I think that we're not going back to the past. I'm not saying that we're creating a product where you will see lines outside of HMV. But what I am saying is that for this new generation, we're creating an opportunity for music fandom to look a little bit differently. So for us, it doesn't just stop with the artists. I think that it also is like, you know, there are music fanatics of festivals. There are music fanatics of local radio stations. There are music fanatics of independent record labels. And I think it's about creating a space where this type of persona are able to engage with each other. And so if you are a super fan of Doja Cat, you might also be a super fan of Rock Nation, and you might also be a super fan of Coachella. And then therefore you're able to suddenly connect with people of all those different brands or artists. And in saying, you know, just to sort of push back, I think when I look at my pyramid of the different types of entities that we'd like on SonX, absolutely the foundation is artists, and certainly those that have a higher proportion of Gen Z or young millennials as fans. And then I think the middle is those partnerships. It's festivals, it's local radio stations, as I mentioned. But I do think the top of that triangle is catalog. I do think that it is us figuring out, okay, cool. If you're an artist that has been around for 10 to 15 years or over 10 to 15 years, what kind of engagement is your fans looking for from you? So maybe it's not you uploading content every day, but potentially we'll be able to figure out a way that all of the content that you've been sitting on throughout your career, suddenly you're able to monetize that, and your super fans are able to engage with that content, or maybe they're still able to connect with each other in some way. So I wouldn't discount catalog. I do think that there is a place for it on SonX, but I see that as being the top of the pyramid.
Okay. Really interesting point. You bringing in festivals and record labels and radio stations into this, in that you know, obviously the primary customer, as you said, is the artist themselves. Do you view those record labels, festivals, and radio stations as just that, as partners, or as potential customers as well?
I think both. I think, you know, at the moment, for the most part, if we use festivals as an example, they engage with their customers for 2 days of the year when they actually have the festival. And you have customers that are going to that festival that go every year. And I think that if some of those festival brands, it may not work for all of them, just like, SonX won't work for every artist. But I think if some of those festival brands looked at themselves as some sort of like publishing houses where they could have their own radio channel, or for having a membership to the festival page on SonX, you have a different experience at the festival. I do think that there are people that are willing to pay for that. And so, yes, I do think that in some sense, those partners are also customers as well.
Okay, interesting. And is there a kind of a further track here? I think what we need in order to think about the longevity of digital platforms right now is to think in a space where people are living more of their life in a virtual world rather than in a physical world. From a music industry perspective, what does that start to look like? I mean, we've got, the Travis Scott concert in Fortnite a few years ago that was actually, they said it was 10,000 people, but it was only 100 people per server, right? Because the servers can't hold that many people. This is like a 10-year track, right?
Yeah.
And when you're in Web3, technology is moving so goddamn fast that what you would ordinarily think about as being a 10-year kind of journey here, actually in the old world is about 30 years or 40 years or 70 years worth of development. So is there a kind of a second, third horizon that you're thinking about here with expected journey for SonX?
We definitely had, if you want to call it quote unquote, a metaverse plan that, about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago now. And that was because when we started raising capital, investors were sort of saying to us, well, what's your metaverse plan? Where's your metaverse slide? Kind of thing. And so Lewis and I sort of drifted some ideas together. And I think where we got to it was basically, I said the rule is, I don't want to see any ideas from anyone on the team where you're telling me we will go and listen to music in the metaverse. That I don't want to see. I think that, number one, I think that it's obvious. But the second thing is, I think that I was of the feeling that you can't replicate the feeling of being at a concert, And so I think that for me, it wasn't something that was as exciting. What was exciting was doing things within the metaverse that are everyday things that you would never be able to do with your artists, your favorite artists. So for me, it was sort of like, okay, cool. I am a super fan of Drake. I will never live in Drake's house. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Are you really a super fan of Drake?
No.
No. I knew it. You liar.
but in the metaverse, if Drake had an apartment complex or a estate, as a super fan, I'd want to live there.
Yeah.
And so for us, the idea was, okay, if we built all these communities, on the app, how do you take these everyday things that everyone does and then associate it to artists? So where we got with it was sort of creating these towns that sort of were genres. So say, for example, you had Westminster next to Lambeth, you would have R&B next to rock. And then within the R&B towns, you would have, Mary J. Blige, Doja Cat, etc. And then in rock, you would sort of have the artists that were associated with that genre too. But it was within those genres then having artists, and then within the artists having the superfans that, live within their different communities.
Yeah, no, I can see that. And in the book Ready Player One, it might have been Ready Player One or Ready Player Two, there was an entire planet in the metaverse dedicated to Prince.
Well, yeah.
A whole planet, right?
Yeah.
Just for him. So, okay, I'm with you. And bringing it back to the here and now, Lee, looking at, over the next year or two, there's going to be some challenges that come your way, right? And there's tons of them. So reaching the right artists. And you and I talked about this before, is that I saw tons of propositions for this Techstars cohort, and where we looked at a bunch of companies that were bringing creator economy themed propositions to life. And that the main lens that we looked at that through is, are you able to bring the artists? Are you able to bring the talent? Right. And that is probably the number one thing. You can run a B2C strategy and go out and gather a community of folks. It's easier said than done, but it's really about, are you getting the right artists on board? But is that, do you think, the biggest challenge, or are there others that you think you're going to face along the way?
Yeah, I think, the most immediate challenge is proving to the artist that SonX is the way to monetize their audience. And I think, you know, I can use the example of when I was at Sony Music and we were struggling to get artists to use TikTok. Now might sound ridiculous, but when I started with their, primarily only promoted talent on YouTube and Instagram. And artists were like, I don't want to use another platform. I don't want to use TikTok, kind of thing. The only reason they decided to use TikTok was two reasons. Number one, they could see the results, meaning they could see that their counterparts, their tracks were moving quite quickly up the singles chart. And number two, they needed examples from other artists on how to use the platform, right? Once we had those case studies to show that this is how you use the platform, this is how easy it is for you to use the platform, then it became something that they didn't feel like they would have so much friction sort of using. And so I sort of see it through the same lens in terms of the fact that once we're able to show that you can monetize through a smaller group of people and communicate that properly to the artist, I think that that's going to be the first thing that they want to see. But then also, I've had discussions with my team about how we communicate to the artist on a day-to-day, week-by-week basis, because that's going to be their dopamine. That's what's going to make them continue to use the platform to see that money rolling through constantly. But then the second thing is making sure that with some of the artists on the platform, there is always this white glove experience where we can have case studies to then show other artists on how you can get the best out of SonX so that you can reach your goals, which is to continue to make music and figure out who cares about you the most. In terms of onboarding, I think there are sort of several different passages that you can take. I think unlike some of our counterparts who maybe don't have experience working in the industry, we're not coming at this from a point of view which is we're just going to destroy the music industry and we're going to get rid of Sony and they're not going to exist anymore. Partnerships are super important to us. And I think that, yes, we want to continue to work with independent talent, etc. But I think it would be optimistic to think that the industry, which currently owns 75% of all music, we can just ignore them. And what I mean by that is obviously Sony Music, Universal, and Warner. And so, for us, I think that the good thing is that we are going for that middle class of talent. Again, I think some people have made the mistake of raising and deciding that they're going to first work with Doja Cat and Snoop Dogg. I think for us, it's about showing that this works for many different audience sizes and at many different points in your career. Obviously, working ourselves up to working with those artists, but knowing that our business works with that middle class, knowing that even if we never had a Doja Cat on the platform, we still would be incredibly successful. And so yeah.
Okay. You mentioned something there that kind of got me in terms of, the case studies and being able to show artists how this works and how it's successful. If you thought of any innovative ways yet to do that besides your standard, the most I see case studies done is on slide decks, right? Is there a way to kind of pull this together that you think will really hit the artists?
That's really interesting.
Because I'm thinking, I only saw this just yesterday because the social media just exploded around Techstars Web3 in the last few weeks, and there's been so much of it. But Lewis, I think, or you put up a pretty cool video that looked like Lewis playing the guitar with some Techstars logos going in the background. Did a little Pete Townsend jump at the end there.
Yeah.
Right. And, that caught my attention. It's 15 seconds. Awesome. And, doing a slide-based case study for an artist is kind of like almost dismissing the fact that they are a musician and an artist. And there's some type of multimedia way to kind of show them and package this all up. What do we used to call it? A dazzle reel.
Yeah.
Something like that. Have you thought much about that?
Yeah, I think the answer is no. Not yet. I haven't thought about that part. But I think, it's within my personality that I'm, even for example, we have an artist infomercial that I put together that's about 1 minute 30 long that has done very well. It's actually helped us to put this in a digestible way for artists to understand what we're trying to create. So I'm always thinking about how we can put this together in a way that they would like. So I probably, if we are sending the results that we get to a record label, I think obviously the slides probably would work. But I think if we're, trying to engage with an individual artist, we'll probably have to create a better way of getting that information across. I particularly like animation.
Mm-hmm.
I think animation is quite cool. I think, for us, the number one result that we're trying to get out of these case studies, obviously there are many touch points, but the number one result is this is how much I made on my streaming service this month versus this is how much I made from SonX this month. And I think, having some sort of infomercial that starts with that result and then works it backwards to the beginning, I think could be very effective.
Yeah. And it's like the stuff I'm thinking of, see, and that's why you're right for this, right? Because the stuff I'm thinking of, the razzle dazzle reel, is the stuff for the fans.
Yeah.
It's not the stuff for the artist. Like you pull together this really cool video of the artist and, having their live music snippet that's on the platform, or having their digital merch or their physical merch that's on the platform, and their super fans going nuts, like virtually. Like that's for the fans. Mm-hmm. It's the artist, it's monetization that matters. So
yeah,
that's brilliant. Is there something that to be true based upon your life's experience that others believe to be false? This is what we call the earned secret.
I think some people will agree and some people will disagree. And I think actually there's an even amount on both sides. I think you'll probably agree because you're where you are in your career. But I definitely would say that specifically to probably Gen Z entrepreneurs, that this, as much as this experience has had its ups and downs and has had hurdles, I think without the 10 years or 12 years of experience that I would have had, I think it would have been much harder. And I think that, yes, you might have believed that you've come up with an idea that needs to happen now. But I think if you can delay it in any way and get that experience from being in an office or being part of a corporation. And the great thing about my experience is that I worked for startups previously, and then I worked for big corporations as well. And I was able to see the pros and negatives to both. And that's definitely helped with the way that I manage my team and also the business as a whole. I think if you can, the best thing that you can do is go out and get some experience. And even if that means not going to university, I think, when I wanted to be a fashion editor, I decided that I wasn't going to go to university. Instead, I was like, if I don't have a job by the end of these 2 years of internships, then I failed my degree. And so I interned and assisted at Vogue and Harper's Bazaar and different magazines. But the experience that I got from there and the work ethic that I got from there still is what I have today in the role that I'm doing now. So, I can't stress enough how much experience and working in different industries, even industries that you didn't think you'd work in, for me, music, have ended up being really instrumental.
I know that I get that. And it's that real life experience, right? And it's just being at the coalface of everything. And you just learned so much by doing, And when I did what I consider to be my master's in VC back, 5 years ago, where it was listening to the Full Ratchet podcast on a drive that I had 3 days a week from one side of Dublin way up to the other side of Dublin. That took me 45, 50 minutes to get there. And while I was doing that, I was trying to build a new venture capital business. But did we ever pull the trigger on that business and start investing in mass? No. So you can do all this great prep work to really figure out what you're going to do. But it's until you start executing where you can then look back, right? The thing they say about venture capital is that you don't know if you're any good until 7 years later or 5 years later at the very least, because you could just make 30 investments over a few years and then go to sleep and wait for those things to come due. Now, that's a real crap approach to venture capital. It's not the way that I believe it should be done. So, but it takes time to figure these things out. For you, this is, we got to execute right now, right? So, but in a few years' time, I'd expect you're going to be looking back on SonX and saying, okay, we've got something. we've built this. This
Yeah.
is working. This is doing what we wanted it to do. And I'd say at the same time, there's going to be a whole bunch of things you learned along the way that'll be like, we didn't expect this, but we adjusted and we adapted to it. Right. And that's one of the big things with all this stuff. Cool. We're at the point of the show, Lee, where I do like to ask this last final question that we do ask everybody on the show. What is one thing that people wouldn't expect to know about Lee Gray?
I feel like I've given it away already. that I didn't want to work in music, and I'm not a super fan. I think that most people would assume that I either wanted to work in music or that I was definitely a super fan of someone, and so because of the experience that I had as a super fan is the reason why I built this. But on a non-business sense, previous to working in music, I did a little bit of acting as a kid. So I was in a film called Adulthood, which is it's a UK movie about growing up in London and growing up on a council estate. And I also was in EastEnders a little bit, which is a UK British soap.
Dude, like, yeah, that's what I wanted to hear.
Which is great experience. I was definitely no Lindsay Lohan, but yeah.
You've survived.
I've survived.
Poor Lindsay. Poor Lindsay. Wow. No, there's a show here in Ireland called, what's it called? It's not Coronation Street. Coronation Street's a UK show, isn't it?
That's a UK show, yeah.
There's an Irish version of it, and I forget what it is. But one of a friend of mine, he's still a friend of mine, and he's such a music head. He knows everything about everybody, wow. And he's mad into his music. And there was a tweet that came out once that said, whatever gig this was, it might have been Fontaine's DC, and this was a few years ago in Dublin. But the tweet said, had a great time at the Fontaine's gig last night, but the guy in the white shirt next to me looked like he was having the time of his life. And this was my buddy.
This was your friend.
All right. He is a massive fan of Coronation Street.
Really?
Totally. And he loves it. And he watches it every day.
That's
and he wouldn't
brilliant.
ever expect this. So
that's brilliant.
We need to get him on to EastEnders.
Yeah.
Okay. So
I'd like to know why he doesn't watch EastEnders. Normally people who are super fans of Coronation Street watch the big three, which is Emmerdale, Coronation Street, and EastEnders night to night because they're back to back. But yeah.
Yeah. No. Awesome. Well, listen, Lee, this has been a great chat. Thank you so much. And what is the best way for people to get in touch with you?
On Instagram at LeeGray_, or, always feel free to email. I love as many emails as I could possibly get each day. So that's lee@sonx.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And I know we're going to be talking to you in the next day or two. So
yes. Thank you
awesome.
So much, Pete.
That does it for this week, folks. Thanks to Lee Gray for opening up his mind to help us figure out why he does what he does. You can learn more about Lee and SonX in the show notes on our website, moneyneversleeps.ie. If you like what you heard, please leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, as it helps others to find the show. Thanks to Conan Brophy from Create Sound for mixing and editing this episode. Conan is an excellent media man to get in touch with when you're thinking about launching your own podcast. As for me, I'm an early-stage startup investor focused on where fintech meets crypto and crypto meets Web3, and I'll lead the Techstars Web3 Accelerator. There are plenty of links in the show notes on moneyneversleeps.ie on how to get in touch, so don't hesitate to reach out. Finally, till next time, thanks for listening. See ya!